No, the only problem is that the slide I have here is not what's on the. Or I refresh. The slides, which I'm the one presenting.
I can see the first slide that we have here is also the same one on the YouTube page.
It's the same one, eh?
Yeah.
But
you can also maybe show the next one so that you can confirm.
That one?
It takes a little bit of time to reflect the other side.
Yeah.
Because now what we still have is the first slide.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe now, yeah, it has come to it's now the same one.
The one which is exercise 1, eh?
Yeah, I think there's some transition time from this to YouTube.
Normally, yeah, that happens. Okay.
Yeah, so I think we have some strangers here. I don't know how they got to be here.
Normally they do that, unless we ask them. Helen, how are you? Helen.
Perhaps Michelle Rotich can talk because Helen naona kuingia hapo na listen only. Michelle. So I don't know if Serem can shed some light. Why does it take some time before what we have on this conference shows to what is in the YouTube channel? Is it an issue of a technological issue, or it's just a delay that we can deal with?
So, Dr. Moke, you get that? Dr.
Yes. I can hear you, Dr.
Now, is it already 7 we start, or we give another 1 minute?
1 minute.
Okay.
I think we are good to go, Dr.
Yeah. Now, Salam is saying he needs to test the YouTube soundtrack and see whether it's okay. Salam, can you confirm it's okay? Is it okay, Salam? The YouTube sound. Now, the other eventuality you have to be prepared with is this one, because I'm sure there are some students who got the what do you call it, the logging credentials, and they logged in, and if more log in, of course, we are going to be switched off. Yeah, if maybe Dr. Moke, if you can put some message there that the students should log in through YouTube instead of the KNet one. Yeah, because I'm sure at the moment they hit 50, we'll be switched off. So I think then we can maybe we can start. Dr. Moke, is that okay?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
You can begin.
Thank you. So I think then the first thing that we need to do is to start recording the session. And let me take this opportunity to welcome all the students and our colleagues who are already logged in that have joined us for this first topic on CCS 101 on communication skills. As a way of introduction, my name is Hezron Mugaka. I'll be taking you through the first topic of this unit on fundamentals of communication and collaboration. That is topic number 1. Let me first of all make some announcement to the students. We still see that some of you are not clear on how this unit is going to be handled. We did explain last Monday that all first years, you are expected to log in and learn through this platform every Monday from 7 for about 1 hour and a half, and then from there, arrange for or attend to arranged tutorials or discussion fora. So please let it be clear to all the students that on Monday morning, all the first years should attend this session from 7 to around 8:30 or 9 at most. And then from there, you get back to your respective arranged tutorials. So please, if you have got a friend who has not gotten this clear, let it be very clear that you are all expected to attend. And the other requirement is that the public chat, you indicate your name, official name, and your admission number, because that is what we are going to use to check the class attendance. And you also need to know that if you don't attend a minimum of 68% of the lessons that we are going to offer, then that means that you will not be eligible to sit for the exam. Or even if you sit for the exam, your marks will be disqualified. So it's very important that you take note of this, that you register for the online classes every Monday from 7 to around 9. So I hope that one is very clear now, so that the students should not be confused. Then what do they do about the other sessions which have been provided in the course of the week? Those other sessions in the teaching timetable are meant for tutorials, where you'll be taken through if you have got issues to raise, if you have got questions to ask, if you have been given exercises to do, then your respective resource persons expect that you make those presentations. It's basically sessions we have provided for you to apply the knowledge which we are going to learn through the online sessions. So the topic today, as we have said, is fundamentals of communication and collaboration. And my name is Hezron Mogaka. I'm going to lead the session. And we expect to be together for the next 1 hour to 1 hour and a half. So as usual, we will start with thinking through an exercise that we expect all the students to reflect either individually or in groups. But the other announcement that I would like also just to make is that you bear with us that there's a time lag in terms of the transmission from the KNet to the YouTube, but at the end of the day, it's a fairly short time. So we'll try to balance that before we move from one slide to the other one, we have the materials in your YouTube. So as we will be going through this particular topic, topic number 1 of 11 topics, that is on fundamentals of communication and collaboration, I requested that the students reflect on the following. That is an exercise that is very important, that you pick issues, ideas from the discussions we are going to have today and see how best you can answer this question. And the exercise number 1 reads as follows. Your county governor intends to recruit a communication expert to draft and disseminate development initiatives. You have been requested to chair the recruitment panel. In preparation for the exercise, that is the recruitment, prepare a well-structured interview points the panel should consider in selecting the most suitable candidates. And from the exercises we are going to give you, you should be able to see the direction that we are going to take in terms of the questions that you expect in your CAT 1, CAT 2, as well as the main exam. We shall mainly deal with application questions and not where you cram answers and reproduce. Because at the end of the day, we want to make you better communicators. Therefore, that is the first exercise that we want you to take, either small groups or as individuals, in addition to the activities that are in your portal. But I hope that by now you are able to access the activities and attempt them. So make sure that exercise is undertaken. Your resource person may want you to present that exercise in your respective tutorials. So the first thing that we need to talk about is to look at the lesson objectives. Why are we spending time on this lesson? That is, we have got 4 key objectives for the lesson. Objective number 1 is to enable you as the learners think through on what constitutes effective communication and why collaboration is important in academic and general life. So again, one of the key things that as we go through this lesson, most of the questions that we'll ask will basically be testing whether we achieved the objectives and outcomes of the lesson. So objective number 1 is that through this discussion, through these presentations, we expect that you'll be able to understand better on what constitutes effective communication and why collaboration is important in academic and general life. Objective number 2 is to enable you as the learners give some serious reflection on the principles of communication or the characteristics of communication. And that is normally very important because once you understand them, then when it comes to communicating any kind of message that you have or information or an idea, then those are the principles that you'll be applying. Objective number 3 is to create a deep understanding on the part of the learners on the various types of communication. So we here do appreciate that you already have some basic understanding on types of communication, because communication started the moment you landed in this world. In fact, it's even said that mothers and babies in the wombs communicate quite a lot. So communication is basically something that is continuous, and therefore what we are going to do this session and any other sessions is to actually deepen your understanding. And the fourth objective is to enable you as the learners reflect on the barriers to effective communication. So those are the objectives that we have before us that are going to lay the foundation for our discussion and interaction today. In case there are any issues or any questions that you would like to raise, please raise them in the public chat and we'll be able to review them as we continue with the lesson or at the end of the lesson. Now, after we have gone through what we expected to be the objectives of our interaction today, there is some change we expect in you as learners, all as students, and in fact all of us, because learning never comes to an end. As I make these presentations, I'm learning also quite a lot. As you pose issues, as you talk to us, we are also learning a lot and therefore sharpening our skills in this particular area. Therefore, what changes are we expected to see in you, or what changes are you expected to experience if you follow this lesson keenly at the end? Change number 1, we expect to have learners who are able to articulate what constitutes effective communication and its relevancy in life. So that, of course, spells a change that you should be able to articulate what constitutes effective communication and why communication is important in our lives. That is the change that we expect to see at the end of the lesson. The change number 2, which in this case we are referring as outcome, we expect to have learners who are able to discuss the elements that constitute communication, all elements of communication. Discuss them, not mentioning, not outlining, but in the true sense of discussion. Maybe these are other terms that we need also to clarify in our tutorials. When you are confronted with a question on discuss, what does it constitute? Or what is expected of you as a student when you come across a question on discuss? What is it expected of you as a student when you get a question on explain, or articulate, or demonstrate, or outline? Those words are not synonyms. They are very different, and the expectations for the answers are quite different. But we are going to learn and unpack those terms so that when you be confronted with a question in your CAT or in your final exam on a discussion, you will truly discuss that question. You will not just list, but you will discuss. Therefore, the other outcome we expect from the learners, we expect you to be able to explain the importance of communication in academics and in life in general. In this case, you should be able to tell any kind of audience why communication is important in your academic life as well as in general life. The other outcome or change we expect are learners who are able to articulate the principles of communication. They should be at your fingertips by this evening, because we shall still share with you these materials. You already have the materials online, so you should be able to articulate the principles of communication. And finally, the expected outcome from this lesson are learners who are able to discuss the various types of communication. So basically, the objectives and the expected lesson outcomes lay the foundation of our interaction today. The next one that we are going to see, I think, is the flow of the lesson. How are we going to cover this lesson? We have got around 9 issues that we are going to address this morning. We will briefly touch on the definition of communication. We will also give a justification why study communication. We will also talk about the key elements of communication, review the principles of communication, outline the relevance of communication in academic life plus life in general, talk about the types of communication, briefly mention about communication pathways, talk about the barriers to effective communication, and then the role of collaboration in enhancing effective communication. So those are the 9 points which are going to occupy us for the next 1 hour, 15 minutes. That's in terms of definition of communication, why study communication, look at the elements of communication, principles of communication, relevance of communication in academic life particularly, and as well as in general life, look at the types of communication, communication pathways probably, barriers to effective communication, and the role of collaboration in enhancing effective communication. So that is the structure that we are going to adopt in terms of covering our lesson today. Then the next issue that we need to look at now is to start unpacking each of the aspects that we have talked about. First of all, what is communication? And the way we are going to highlight these points is that we expect you to understand and explain what communication is, but not to cram. But as a way of demonstrating or explaining to you what communication is, the first thing we need to understand is that it's a process by which meaning is exchanged between individuals or an individual and a group through common system of symbols, signs, and behavior. So the first thing that you need to pick from here is that communication is a process. And it's a process by which something that is meaningful is exchanged, or meaning is created in something that is exchanged. Exchange takes place between or among entities. And then there is a way this exchange is done. It can be used, it can use symbols, it can use signs, it can even use behavior. Communication can also be a way of sending, giving, or exchanging information and ideas, which is mostly expressed verbally or non-verbally. Communication is also a process of sharing or exchanging ideas, information, knowledge, attitude, feelings through certain signs, symbols, and behavior. Therefore, communication is more than transfer of ideas and thoughts. It's a dynamic process of action and interaction towards a desired goal. So in addition to getting very clearly that communication is a process, it's a means through which something is exchanged between individuals or among individuals and entities. And the most important it's geared towards achieving a certain goal. So basically, that is what we could define communication as. But this next slide is basically to give you a summary. Instead of cramming that first slide, the key points that we want you to understand what communication is that first thing, it is a process. So that one should be on your fingertip, that communication is a process. It involves more than one entity or one faculty or one group or one individual. There's something to be exchanged, because that means there's something to be passed from one individual to the other, or within the one self. And number 4, it is aimed at achieving a specific goal or specific goals. And it may take place using different approaches. It can be verbal, it can be non-verbal, it can be symbols, it can be signs, it can be behavior. One thing that we also need to understand, even animals in the wild do communicate using different approaches. So in the process of using symbols, we can use signs. If you are talking with somebody and that individual starts crying, there's a message that is being passed. If you are talking with somebody and the person runs away, that is still a way of communication. So it's important that you combine these two slides so that we understand very clearly that communication is a process. It involves more than one entity. There's something to be exchanged, and it's aimed at achieving specific objectives. Having underscored what communication is, it's important that we reflect a bit on why study communication. Why are we spending our early morning to come here and learn about communication? The first thing that we need to understand, we are social beings. And the communication is central in shaping our relationships or our relations and interactions. So this is something that you need to underscore, that as social beings, there's a lot that we exchange. And therefore, it's important that as we exchange information, messages, as we interact, we need to understand each other better. Communication as a field where we are investing time will enable us understand and gain insights of oneself and also others. It's very important that we take note of that oneself. Then from there, we talk about others. That is intrapersonal and interpersonal communication. There are times that we used to be asked when we were young that the best way to make a presentation is to make a presentation to yourself. Make a presentation loud and listen to yourself. That means that you are communicating within yourself. And once you listen to your sound, or once you even make a presentation and there's an echo, you are able to get yourself how good that message has been passed to yourself, and whether it will be understandable or not. And that is one area that we shall encourage you, that as a student, and as we are going to get into practicing some of these principles of communication, you talk to yourself first. Therefore, studying communication will help us understand and gain insights of ourselves and others. That is what we call as intrapersonal and interpersonal communication. Intrapersonal is whereby you are communicating within you, and the interpersonal is whereby you are communicating with other external entities. Communication also helps us build self-esteem because this is something extremely important, the self-esteem and self-confidence. because this is another area that we need to build through your tutorials, so that we take you through some of the best practices of public speaking as well as presentations. And once you realize that you are doing well in that, automatically self-esteem comes in and self-confidence. So through the various messages one receives from others about itself can actually build your self-esteem or give you confidence. Studying communication and using it effectively can lead to more positive feeling. This is very important. Every human being will always want to feel nice about themselves or about yourselves. So studying this communication and using it effectively can contribute towards having those positive feelings of oneself. It helps also in character management. It also helps in character building. It also helps in terms of image safeguarding or safeguarding your image. Therefore, by the time you finish this course, we expect that you should be able to interact better. You should be able to have better interpersonal communication skills. Your self-esteem and self-confidence should have been built as well. And you should be feeling that you can actually be a source of inspiration when it comes to other people as far as communication is concerned. So that is why we are spending time to study communication. Number 5, it also increases our knowledge about human relationships, because studying communication includes learning about how people relate with one another and about what communication is appropriate for a given situation. So this is basically saying that once we get into the field of learning communication, we increase our knowledge base about other human beings and the kind of relationships that are there, and what we call as social capital. Because once you study learning the issues of communication, you'll be able to actually understand what people think about certain systems, even what people think about you, because they are able to communicate not necessarily verbally, they can be communicating non-verbally. It also enables us to acquire life and survival skills. These life and survival skills are very important. Some of these skills include public speaking and strategic decision making. This is important because we all want to be somewhere at the end of your 4 years. You all want to excel in your profession. And I'm sure there are people you really admire the way they pass messages. That admiration comes as a result of these people perhaps having sharpened their communication skills. There are others you look at and say, wow, this one is not doing very well. And therefore, the other reason why we are studying this communication is we want you to improve in your public speaking and the way you communicate and the way you make strategic decisions in respect to communication. For example, if you get to a crowd which is hostile, there's a way you can communicate to this crowd in a way that you can be able to calm them down. But through hopeless communication, you can actually make the situation worse. Therefore, by learning this communication, you should be able to make strategic decisions in your life. It also contributes to professional growth. That's the ability to listen and analyze messages. Actually, the next topic number 2 that you'll be covering next Monday is basically the art of listening and analyzing messages and then taking notes. So this is the field that will be able to contribute towards your professional growth. We know that we are representing different professions here. There are people who are doing procurement, there are people who are doing law, there are students who are doing nursing, there are students who are doing accounting. All these professions, one common thing that they have is communication. You cannot have a profession where there's no communication. Finally, this is now a negative part of it. Poor communication may lead to misunderstanding, frustration, being ignored by others, and successive careers, among many other negative consequences. So we don't want to find ourselves in this field. That is where we are running from. We want to run away from being misunderstood. We want to run away from frustrations. We need to run away from being ignored by others. We need to run away from being unsuccessful in our careers. So there are so many negative things of not having good communication skills. And this is why we need then to take this unit very seriously, because this is one skill that will be able to take you beyond this particular unit. That essentially means that by the time you do your exams, please note that you continue. Those people who are doing law, I'm sure you'll be doing communication. The people who are doing any other field, you'll be doing your project, you'll be communicating with your lecturers. So that is why we need to study communication. Now, what are the key elements of communication? Communication is never done in a vacuum. There are people, there are messages, there are channels, there is a feedback, there is a code, there is an encoding and decoding. All that constitutes what is called as communication. Therefore, the first thing that we need to look at is the element we call as the people. These are the participants in the process. Remember what we define communication to be. It is a process. So these are people are the central elements in any communication process, and they are the critical participants because they can either create a misunderstanding through poor communication, or make somebody saying my YouTube channel is not working with the link. Maybe if any of us, Dr. Moke, you can, or Serem, maybe in the YouTube, can you ask whether there are any students who also are facing the same problem or everything is okay? So as we continue, or this is a student who has opted to get through here, Helen, then you continue, Helen, no problem. The other one, the people may be actually they are the sources of the messages. Therefore, they conceive, they package, they encode and disseminate the messages. And at the same time, people are the receivers of the messages. Because communication is always a two-way. It's not that process which we believe is passing one message to another. It has to be received, it has to be decoded, it has to be comprehended, and then a meaning attached to it. And that's what we call as effective communication. So one key element of communication in the central part of it is the people, who can be the generators of the messages, they conceive these messages, or the receivers. But it's not always linear as we are putting it, because when we are communicating, there's a lot of exchange. That's why we say that communication is very dynamic. One point, you are the receiver. At the other point, within a second, you are the generator of the information. So that's how complex it is. But also we need to underscore the factor that influence how messages are communicated. First is the knowledge, the interest, and the emotional state. So if you are communicating a message on medical language, and your profession is not in the medical field, the way you may communicate it may be different from the way the person who is qualified in that field can communicate it. If you have got the background information about the economic performance of Kenya, you may communicate it differently from somebody who is green in terms of the economic status of Kenya. Then the interest that you may have will influence the way we conceive, the way we disseminate messages, and the way we decode them and comprehend them. If you have got something, you are passionate about something, the way you express it will be totally different from another person who would express it who is not passionate about it. The emotional state, our emotions are normally very important because they influence the quality of communication that we have. Therefore, that's one key element in terms of communication is the people. Without people as the central part of it, then you have no communication taking place. And we have said the people may be the recipients or maybe the generators of the information or the message, whatever it is. Then the other element of communication is the message itself. And remember, the quality and effectiveness of communication is actually going to be highly influenced by all these elements. So the next element is the message, and this is either the verbal or non-verbal form of the idea, a thought, or a feeling that one person, that is what the source wishes to communicate to a group of people who will be the receivers, and that's the content. Therefore, when we are talking about the message, it's basically also about the content that we are passing from one entity to the other or within ourselves. Remember, like now, there are a number of you who are basically struggling on which course to take because you get to that, you have been admitted to the university, but then you realize that perhaps you may have another desire to change to another course. When you are given time to go and think about it, that is the message that you are trying to create in you. Then you receive it, then you digest it, you analyze it, and finally you come up with a conclusion and say, after all, because I've come to do library and information sciences, let me settle for that. Or because I've been admitted to a chair, that's agricultural education and extension, but there's something that is more attractive in another course, let me do it. And you struggle within yourself. That's already the message that you are actually conceiving the message within yourself. And then within yourself, you are able to decode the message and come to a conclusion. Another key element in terms of communication is what we call as the channel. And this is the means by which a message moves from one source to the receiver, or it moves from the receiver, from the source to the receiver. It's also called the medium of transmission. With the time, we are going to unpackage this because as you conceive or package certain information or decisions, it's very critical that you consider the most important channel that you will use to communicate this message or this information, because the impact and the influence of this channel, the influence and the impact of the message will depend on the channel that you have used. And that is why learning about communication will be able to enable you make strategic decisions in life in terms of, yes, I have this message. How do I pass it? How do I communicate it? Then, of course, as we say, communication is a process, is very dynamic. Another key element of communication is a feedback. This is the receiver's verbal, non-verbal, or written response to the message from the source. Ideally, communication is not complete unless a feedback is received. That is when you can assess whether that communication or intended message has reached the destination and has had an influence or not. So, for example, in the university here, some of you may be writing memos to your chair, and the chair responds back. That means you are receiving a feedback. You conceived of an idea, you have passed it to the chair of the department chair has looked at it and given you response, either positive or negative. That is the feedback that we are looking for. But otherwise, if you communicate to your chair and the chair never gets back to you, then in that case, you have only passed that message in one way. Where communication, we are saying effective communication should be two ways. It should have an influence on both the source of the generator of the idea and the recipient of the idea. And the only way you can see if it has had an influence is that there should be an exchange. And remember, when we defined what communication is, we brought in the issue of there should be an exchange. Then there is another element of communication which we call as the coding. And this is the systematic arrangement of symbols used by the source or receiver to create meaning in the mind of another person or receiver. It can be in terms of words, it can be verbal, it can be grammar, it can be in terms of expressions. So, for example, if you are discussing in a small group, and one person suggests a very important point on how we can streamline communication among students in the University of Embu, and then you see people sneering. That's an expression. And that sneering means that perhaps the point you have said is not very good. But if you are making your small presentations and you see everybody nodding, that means that they have received the information, they have analyzed it, they have coded it, and they are using an expression in approval. Then the other one, which is also linked to this, is encoding and decoding. This is the act of putting ideas and thoughts into a code, where decoding is interpreting or making sense of those ideas. So in this case, they are kind of linked. So these are the key 6 elements of communication. As we have said, there are people in the central part of it. There's the message itself. There's the channel which is to be used. There's the expected feedback. There's the code, then the encoding and the decoding. So those are the elements of communication. And I hope as we go through this, you are able to pick out how you are a point you can use to answer that exercise number 1. So what are some of the principles or properties of communication? Communication, number 1, is inescapable. You cannot run away from communication unless you live in a vacuum. Therefore, communication always occurs or is always occurring in human life at various levels. For instance, at the intrapersonal level, which we said that you have this idea that you exchange within yourself, you struggle with it the whole night, and you come up with a conclusion the following morning. That is when you are thinking as a person, when you are planning, when you are meditating, when you are making observations, when you are gathering information or making conclusion. We have also said that it also occurs at the interpersonal level as you interact with one another. So remember, intrapersonal communication is the communication within you yourself as an individual. Interpersonal communication is where you communicate across groups, other people. That's why we are saying communication is inescapable. You cannot run away communication. It's part and parcel of our life, and therefore it's important that we sharpen our communication skills, because this will have a big influence on how successful you will be in terms of building your career. The other principle or property of communication is that communication is irreversible. Once communication has taken place, you cannot take it back. It's normally very difficult. You may withdraw the letter. You may say, I'm sorry about that message, but you have already caused the impact. And therefore, that is why we need to be very careful on what we communicate, how we communicate it, and always think about the impact of what you are communicating. That is normally very important, because with this understanding that communication is irreversible, then it makes us become extra careful on what we communicate, how we communicate it, to whom we are communicating, and even the timing itself is very important. So, because once you have caused impact, you cannot withdraw it. The other property or principle of communication is that communication is dynamic, always changing or taking place. That is why we need to be very innovative and change with the times. As we said, if you are walking along the road and you come across an agitated crowd, you need to pass a message of hope. But you get ahead and get another crowd which has a different feeling, which has a different emotions. Then you have to communicate something different. But even the kind of communication channels we use or communication pathways that we use, they are also very dynamic. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was nothing like the platform that we are using. And that is why we have to be very innovative and always think twice before you communicate. So that is another element in terms of communication. So we have already three. Communication is inescapable. It's part of us. It's irreversible. Therefore, we have to be very careful on what we say, when we say it, whom the audience is. We have to be very, very careful. Then the other one is communication is very dynamic. The other principle is that communication is contextual. So because communication does not take place in a vacuum, communication takes place in a given space. There's always a space which is defined, but as we have said, these spaces could be interacting also at the same time. It could be a space within the psychological, in the context of psychology or psychological context, that is in terms of personalities or the value system of individuals. It could be situational context, that is in time and place. It could be environmental in context, that is the physical features around. For example, if you are in the place and the noise levels are very high and you want to pass a message, there is a way that you can communicate that message. Therefore, communication does not take place in a vacuum. It is contextual. And this contextualization of communication is very important because then it shapes or informs the person who is conceiving the message on how best that message should be conceptualized, how it should be packaged, and how it should be passed. But even the recipient, perhaps who is expecting some message from the generator of the information, has also to take the context into consideration. Communication is also complicated. Masi Wangari, can you switch off your whatever, please? Masi, thank you. Communication is also complicated. It involves making several choices in terms of what to communicate, how to communicate it, to whom to communicate, the best time possible. It's a complex thing. Then within that, there are other issues that you need to communicate at the same time. So that's why we are saying communication is not just as linear as we say. It is very complicated because different choices have to be made, different decisions have to be made, anticipations have to be built. Communication is also dynamic, which we have already mentioned. It's always changing and taking place. That was point number 3. Otherwise, there are 5 key principles of communication, where we are saying communication is inescapable. You cannot run away from it. Communication is irreversible. Communication is dynamic. Number 4 is communication is contextual, and then communication is complicated. So this one, we remove that. That should not be there. Then the next thing that we need to look at are the types of communication. I hope we are all following, and you are also writing down if there are any issues you need to raise during the tutorials. You should raise them. But what we need you to understand is how do you apply all these issues that we are talking about. Types of communication, one thing that we can start with is that communication can be categorized in 2 ways. These are the the general categories of in which we can have communication. It can be categorized by the number of people involved in the communication process and levels of communication. It can also be defined, categorized by the channel or medium used in the communication process. And with the time, you will learn that there are very many other categories of communication, depending on the context. But for our case, let us build these two and see what are they. By the number of people involved, what do we mean? We have already said that you can have intrapersonal communication. That is why, as a person, you debate within you as a self on a number of issues that you need to address. You can also have interpersonal communication. That is what we call as dyadic and small group communications. Like, for example, during our tutorials, we are going to have interpersonal communication whereby there will be small group communications. But you can also have public communication. This is normally characterized by an individual communicating to very many people or to a number of people. So the public communication is, for example, what I'm doing at the moment could be considered to be almost falling within that realm of public communication. It's an individual communicating to quite a number of you, and we expect you to be no less than 2,000 students logged in this morning. And I hope the confusion is moving away where you think that you're going to have another lecture during your smaller sessions. The smaller sessions will be doing something different. So this is an example of public communication. Then there is, of course, the mass communication, which, as from the definition here, it could be involving probably very many people broadcasting at the same time to a number of people, like what you see in the TVs and many other ways. So, under one category of communication can be in terms of the number of people involved. Please note that there are 4 levels here. There is the interpersonal communication within you. There is the communication within small groups, which in this case is going to be probably your tutorials. There will be the public communication, whereby you normally see even politicians when they are addressing the crowds. That is an example of public communication, like what I'm doing. Then there's the mass communication, which you experience probably from mass communication channels like TVs and what have you. So that is the first category, which is defined by the number of people. As we said, there can be many other categories, but for the purpose of this unit, we shall focus mainly on what will make meaning to our life and learning. The next one is by the channel or medium used in the communication process. Again, from here, we have got around 4 channels of communication or media. The first one is the verbal communication, or what you call as the oral, auditory, the signal for communication, whereby you discuss issues. It could be face-to-face, it could be through a platform like this one, but verbally, we are communicating. It will be through graphic communication, that is in terms of the visual communication, e.g. graphs, cartoons, models. You have seen some of our politicians taking others, or individuals taking others to court because a certain cartoon almost depicted the behavior of that individual. That graphics has actually communicated a point. And there are quite a number of you perhaps who like watching, looking at cartoons, or even looking at the drawings or models. It's a way of passing a message. The other one is through written communication. Written communication is, for example, what you're going to do with your application letters. What you do when you want to write to your chair that you want to have extra sessions in a certain unit, that's written. And then there's the non-verbal communication, Paralinguistic communication, as it is called, and it will include facial expressions, postures, gestures. And human beings are normally very good in this number 4, even in the animal kingdom. When you see animals even bluffing, whereby they increase their size when they see, for example, a predator or an enemy, that is an expression which they want to see that they are mighty, but they are posturing. They are communicating something that don't dare come. You have seen some animals which probably even change color once an enemy comes. That is a posture, that's a gesture. So these are the types, the channels of communication under which that broad category we have it. Therefore, what is intended in this unit is that we need to sharpen your skills in terms of verbal communication. We need to sharpen your skills in terms of graphic communication. We need to sharpen your skills in terms of written communication, because some of your exams will require you some of the questions to even write a comprehension about something that will be testing about your written skills. During the tutorials, we are going to give you marks. We are going to test about your verbal communication. How able will you be to communicate a message about a specific aspect? And then, of course, we also want to sharpen your skills in terms of non-verbal communication, because it can be against your politeness. For example, you've seen people when they are meeting, they bend their heads low. What does that mean? You are communicating something. You are communicating humility. You are communicating honor. So these are the areas that we need to sharpen you, so that when you get out of this university, you are able to clearly show a distinction between somebody who has gone through a serious class of improving their communication skills, as compared to somebody else who has not done it. So please don't take these lessons as a ritual that is supposed to enable you just to pass your exam, but these interactions between your resource persons during your morning hours on Mondays and during your tutorials are meant to actually improve these areas and make the right decisions on what kind of channel you use. So what are some of the barriers to communication? After having gone through types of communication, it's not just a smooth communication. We said already is complex. The barriers to communication could be, one, the differences in opinion. You can imagine somebody who believes in a certain ideology. For example, if I believe in a bottom-up approach, and somebody else believes in the trickle-down approach to economic development, the two individuals are basically talking about the same thing, economic development, but the approaches could be different. But when you have got different opinions about something, once you believe that this opinion is different from mine, then you block. There is no communication. You cease even to listen. So that is normally very important, that we should never form very strong opinions unless you have received the message, you have decoded it, you have analyzed it, and that leads to the second issue, which is another barrier of communication, jumping into conclusions too early. That is, there are people who make presentations, but before somebody completes a statement, somebody has already shouted back. That means that you have already concluded that this message has no meaning in my life. But you should give time for this message to be passed, and then from there, decode the message, analyze it, and then make a conclusion. And that is closely linked to whereby we have got prior opinions about either individuals about ideas, that you will always be influenced and make decisions before you receive the full message, and then analyze it and then decode it. And then make a conclusion. That is why we are saying that as good communicators, whom we expect from this class at the end of the session, the most other important thing is to listen. And that's the topic that you are going to do on Monday. To listen, to digest the message, and then analyze it, and then you make a conclusion. Then there is the other part here, which is on stereotyping. That is treating people as though they are the same. That is where many of us actually are very good in this. And let me give a classical example whereby people always believe that individuals from Western Africa are good musicians. That's already treating people the same. It's not all the people from West Africa who are good musicians. There are people also who believe that people from a certain region in this country, for example, have very poor accent, and therefore they cannot pass any message that is as a meaning. That's already stereotyping, whereby you are treating, based on your past experience, you treat everybody to be the same. That is another area that we need to run away from. Stereotyping is a major barrier in terms of communication. It can also be stereotype whereby you believe that probably students from University of Embu are the best orators because you have seen one or two or three. Of course, statistically, you are allowed to make that conclusion, but in terms of communication, wait until you get the message. Therefore, the fact that you got 3 students who are good orators from University of Embu, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the students from the University of Embu are good orators. Then the other one is in terms of the lack of knowledge. This is something that is normally very serious, and we may not blame ourselves. We may be discussing or ignoring issues because you don't have the basic knowledge about that issue. And therefore, that lack of knowledge will always prevent an effective communication. For example, if one of you is doing law and the other one, another person is doing English literature, the language that the lawyers use at times is very different from what we ordinarily know. The language that is used in biblical terms is very different from what we all know. But that is why, as much as possible, we should try to get adequate knowledge about anything before we engage in any kind of communication. Then the other one is the lack of interest. We have already said this, that when you don't have interest in something, you block. Definitely, if somebody is talking about procurement and I don't want to understand procurement, I just block. So there will be no communication between me as somebody who believes in accounting with somebody else who is doing procurement. So that lack of interest in any of these issues would actually be a major barrier in terms of effective communication. Then we have got difficulty with expression. Again, this is something that we need normally to be very patient if you want to be a good communicator, because it's not everybody who has been given the art of being in terms of very good in expressions. There are people who take time before they pronounce a statement. There are people who are almost emotionless even when they are talking about something. So when you have got individuals have difficulties in terms of expressions, or they have egos, then the way they express the ideas may actually create a barrier in terms of communication. The other issue is about emotions. We all have different emotions, and emotions can also be a major barrier in terms of communication. Personalities, we are all gifted differently. We have got different personalities in ourselves. We have got different value systems, and therefore, personality issues can actually be a major hindrance in terms of communication. There are people who talk, and the way they talk is interpreted as if they are proud or they are arrogant. And you have seen some of our senior government officials who actually say very important things, but because people already believe that that personality has an arrogant personality or anything of that kind, then they switch off, and then it becomes a major barrier. So it's important to recognize that when we are talking about communication, when we are packaging our messages for communication, when we are within an environment of communicating, it's important you bear in mind that there are all these barriers. These barriers, you should take care of them as an individual before you reflect on the other individual could also be having these kind of traits or habits that actually can create a barrier between two individuals or more who are intended to exchange very important information. So these are the barriers that we need. At the end of the day, then the question we can even ask you, how do you then overcome these barriers? What innovative ways? And that's one thing that I would encourage every student, that from now, pick one or two, pick like 2 to 3 barriers, and start understanding how do you overcome these barriers for you to enhance effective communication. Now we are almost concluding. As we said, we are here for 1 hour up to a maximum of 1 hour and a half. This could be the second last or third last slide. They are what we call the 7 C's of effective communication. And these are the areas that we would like that you sharpen with the time. And you need to do this, because if you don't have effective if there is no effective communication, then in that case, it's a wasted effort. One of the things that I want you to do as students is to unpack each of these terms and understand what are they in respect to effective communication. For example, number 1, we are saying clarity in your message. To be clear and not vague. There needs to be completeness. There are some people who talk and leave out words, certain words, and at the end of the day, the message is not, either is misconceived or the message is not comprehended at all. Completeness is very important, but I want you, as an additional exercise, that you undertake some time, look at what does it take for a message to be complete. What does it take for a message to be concise? What does it take for a message to be consistent? Because consistency is also very important. You may find people write 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph is contradicting even the third paragraph. What does it take for a message to be consistent? What does it take for a message to be correct? That is in terms of correctness, consideration, and the courtesy. So those are the 7 C's of effective communication. Dr. Moke is saying the question I gave at first, that first one, the exercise, or the one on the 7 C's, Dr. Anyway, I think maybe we can talk as I conclude, then, so that I can repeat that question. But as we are saying, this second one, I would like you as students to get into your notebooks, into your reference materials, and then understand clearly what constitutes each of these 7 points. The other thing that I would like you to have as a virtue of life, is effective communication. Because effective communication can open doors for you. It can improve your professional progression. It can enhance your academic life. It's about everything. So can it be a virtue from today? We have a covenant that as much as possible, you try to be an effective communicator to the best of your ability, bearing in mind that any message that you pass, there must be clarity, there must be completeness, it must be concise, there should be consistency, correctness, consideration, and the courtesy. So let it be a virtue, one of the virtues in your life. The last slide before I get to what Dr. Moki has asked, so that we go back to the first question, and I believe that this is going to be our last slide, is we have talked about collaboration. What is the place of collaboration in effective communication? Later, you are going to talk more about collaboration studies, collaborative work. The entire global community now expects everything you do it in collaboration. You don't do it as an individual, because there is value in group work. Collaboration is basically defined as the process where two or more people or entities or organizations work together to complete a task or achieve a goal. That is what we call as the synergy. And there's this term in economics which goes that the sum total of individuals is smaller than the total of when considered as a group. So synergy is very important. If you want to accomplish your work, synergetic efforts are very important. Therefore, collaboration is very critical where two or more people intend to achieve a certain goal. Then in this case, you may find that one person has got strengths in another, and another person has strengths in another area. Then that one put together, that's why we say that the sum total of the whole is bigger than the sum total of the individuals. Therefore, considering communication is aimed at achieving specific goals. Now, if we go back to what we said, communication is meant to achieve specific goals. Collaboration, therefore, is central, because we have said through collaboration, you are able to achieve certain goals more efficiently, more effectively, and more cost effectively. When you take the issue of costs. Now, what are the benefits of collaboration? It can be collaboration at a student level, it can be collaboration at community level, it could be collaboration at institutional level. Collaboration improves delivery of services. It promotes teamwork. And in fact, one of the issues I've not written here, it's very important in social capital building. So it's important you understand that as an additional point number 6. Number 1, it improves delivery of services because of synergy. It promotes teamwork. It brings about innovation, because when you are coming to the table, you have got different innovative abilities. When you put it together, then in that case, you have got a bigger platform for innovation. It also improves effectiveness and efficiency. That's another issue that you need to add for those who are taking notes. It improves effectiveness and efficiency, and it also enhances improved communication. Therefore, through listening and learning from team members, you can help each other reach your goals. This is very critical, and that is the whole essence, the value of collaboration. Through listening to and learning from team members, you can help each other reach your goals. And I find it is very common in the universities, even in our school lives, when we were in school, where we used to do some homework, exercises as a team, and actually you strengthen each other. But in terms of also strengthening each other, you are creating a team. You are improving on your social capital, which is normally very important. So that is the role of collaboration in terms of communication, because it plays a central role. Because one of the critical things in terms of communication is listening, as you're going to see, and also learning. That is very, 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 very important. So that is what we have for today. And topic number 2, which will be delivered next week on 27th, 2021 from 7 a.m. provisionally to 10 a.m. and it will be virtual, will be on listening and note taking. So let's go back to the first slide where we had an exercise. I hope after listening to all this, and as we said, the materials are also in the web, in your platform. We shall also circulate these simple notes. The exercise that we want you to do is look at your county governor, and here, please take into consideration your county and try to also understand your county. There are a number of students I normally ask, which county do they come from? What is the county number? They can't even tell you. They know they come from Embu County. They don't know the size of the county. They don't know the governor. They don't know the population. So what do you know about your county? As a basic unity of administration, you should understand it. So the exercise is your county governor intends to recruit a communication expert to draft and disseminate development initiatives. You have been requested to chair the recruitment panel in preparation for the exercise. Prepare well-structured interview points the panel should consider in selecting the most suitable candidate. Out of what we have discussed today, are there any issues that you can say that this is what we want to ask and assess whether the person we want to recruit is actually going to be good in drafting and disseminating these development initiatives? So what the county government intends to do, or the governor, is to create some kind of publicity to communicate to the public on different interventions that the county government is taking. So that is what we would like you to reflect on. It is something that can attract as many answers as the number of students. And this is where we test how innovative you are in terms of stretching your mind. So I think up to that point, before I close, I would like to make the following announcement. I think for the group that I'm supposed to lead, we could start meeting from next week. For the group this morning, I think group B, but for group C, we can have a short meeting to agree on the modalities of how we are going to conduct our tutorials, because you are 300 of you, and 300 of you cannot fit in any hall in this university, and therefore we have to work out the mechanisms of strictly adhering to COVID containment measures, including social distancing, something that we should not take lightly. Perhaps up to this moment, I would like to invite Dr. Moke to make any announcements and probably answer. We have, how do we access the notes, please? For the notes that we are going to use for PowerPoint presentation, like what we have used this morning, we will circulate them through your respective groups, WhatsApp groups. They are also in the portal. So there are lots of materials in the portal. What you need to understand is how to access them. So I think we have kept our promise. We said we are going to be here for 1 hour to 1 hour and a half. And I believe that our promise has been kept. But it's my prayer that we have achieved the objectives that we outlined right from the beginning, that you are going to improve in a number of aspects, and that is what you need to reflect on. Check how well you are able to talk about what's effective communication. Assess whether you are able to articulate principles of communication. Assess whether you are able to talk about the types of communication. Assess whether you are able to talk about the barriers to communication, to effective communication. Then are you able to articulate what constitutes effective communication? If somebody confronts you by tomorrow morning, are you able to say that this is what constitutes effective communication and how important is communication in my life? Are you able to discuss the elements that constitute communication? We have talked about them. Are you able to explain the importance of communication in academics and in life in general? Are you able to talk about the principles of communication or the characteristics of communication? And then are you able to discuss the various types of communication? Ideally, if you are able to understand this by today evening, because these notes, we shall circulate them immediately, then for that lesson, you are home and dry. And more important, the application part of it. So up to that point, probably may I invite Dr. Moke, the unit coordinator, please to take over the platform.
Thank you, Dr. Mugaka, for that meticulous introduction of the course. This is our first topic, and it has been done so well. I appreciate that, and also in the process, I'm also learning very many things. I want to just respond to few issues that I have picked from the student queries section or the chat at the YouTube. Yeah, you have set the pace for both of us who are going to present during this time. So many people are asking, what are tutorials? Can't we go to class and just experience what happens there and perhaps conclude by ourselves what tutorials are likely to be? But generally, it is now a close kind of interaction with your lecturer in class. Those who have classes today morning, your lecturers are already waiting for you to have some contact with you, where so many of the issues you have raised will also be addressed. Notes are not visible. I want to confirm that the slides that Dr. Mogaka has have been very clear, very accessible from my end. So when they are not clear on your part, perhaps it is the kind of gadget you are using, maybe the phone. Let's not say it is your fault, but what can you do when you face such a challenge during class? And I saw a number of you telling those who are continuously saying it is not visible to listen. Yes, listening is one, because at one of the lecturers may decide they are not preparing slides. Even if they prepare, they want you to listen to the presentation. So listening is important because the audio was very clear and the presentation was excellent. So learn to listen so that you don't treat a challenge as a major distraction in your lesson. So just listen, and as you do that, you can take notes. But as we've said, the presentation, this presentation and one that was given last week are going to be availed to you through your various groups, and we will also upload them via Moodle. And that brings me to the other concern: how do you enroll to Moodle? If you check my answer, I have given you the enrollment key for all of the groups. So if you are going to Moodle and they ask you for an enrollment key and you're in group A, you will just type OK at 2021 and O is capital. The rest are not. But I have provided for each of the lecturers or for each of the groups the enrollment key that you will use. The notes, all of them are also online for you to keep reading. The various activities that are given online are supposed to be answered there. The discussions are supposed to take place there, but these ones will also be given more light in class by your respective lecturers. Somebody is crying out bundles. We advised you that you can be on campus because there is an internet connectivity on campus for you to use. So please make a point of being available there. What else? Yes, Dr. Mugaka talks about what you communicate, how you communicate, the impact that you create as you communicate. And I picked one message. I think it's not fair if I don't address that. Somebody says, Omoke, how do we access the names? Why aren't you answering me? And 2 question marks at the end. So that for me is a lot of communication. It shows one, some level of disrespect, and also impatience and a wrong attitude. So when asked questions, those ones are allowed, but how do you package your message so that they are not offensive? So this is a public forum. I want to encourage you that before you write anything, you remain sensitive. Otherwise, I want to release you to your various classes. Your lecturers are waiting for those who have classes today. Thank you for that time that you've given us. And I think, Dr. Mogaka, if there's nothing, we can let the students go and meet their lecturers for those who have classes today.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moke. I think I've underlined one thing, the 7 C's of effective communication. Courtesy, being courteous is very important, and being sensitive, but you are learning. As we said, we are in a learning environment, and it's important that we point out some of these issues that we can point right from the beginning, that this is the right way to do things. If there is any group that I'm supposed to meet this morning, I will say that we meet next week after the online session. But for the evening class, in case I have one, and the morning tomorrow, we can meet and then strategize on how to conduct our tutorials. Otherwise, thank you so much. Dr. Moke, over to you to conclude the session. Thanks.
Yes, please let each one of us, because we know our groups, check the timetable. The timetable is available on the university website. Thank you so much. Thank you, IT team, for supporting us. Today we have had an excellent class. We cannot take that for granted.